Welcome to the Round 6 application webinar. We are recording this webinar, so if you want to turn your cameras off, then feel free. We will keep the data in line with the SEMLEP privacy policy, which can be found on our website, and we'll be making the webinar available online after the event. So just to make you aware of that. So welcome. We're going to talk today about the application process and a little bit about what you need to do. But with us this morning, this afternoon even. Sorry, if I can just remind people to put themselves on mute, that would be great. Thank you. So my name's Gail Parker. I'm the project manager for Community Grants Programme, and I've been with SEMLEP on and off for about 10 years. Also with us this afternoon is Alison Coleman, Project Officer for the Community Grants Project, and Heidi Price, also Project Officer, and Becky Thornton, who is our sponsor and also the person most likely to contact you and speak to you in the first stages of the application process from Voluntary Impact Northamptonshire. So that's your team, presentation team today. Okay, so what we'll be talking about today is a lot more about the application process, obviously, and the nitty-gritty of that process. But what I'm going to do to kick us all off is to put a bit of context around the Community Grants Programme. Now, this section is very important. One of the things that we have noticed over the last few rounds is that the section in the applications, which is how does your programme or project fit with SEMLEP priorities, tends to be quite weak. So the section that I'm going to go through now is really about what you're going to need to write in that answer and how you're going to try and fit your project into the SEMLEP priorities. So it's worth noting this section, it is quite important, so do please take notes. We will be circulating the slides afterwards. So the SEMLEP programme started in 2013 and the South East Midlands was given an allocation, an ESIF allocation of 79.5 million. So that was both ERDF and ESF funding across the whole of the area. So that was split into projects for businesses and projects for skills. So we're primarily talking about the ESF funding today. And as part of the ESF funding allocation, we had a number of opt-ins we were able to do. And one of those was the Skills Funding Agency. And within that was community grants. So that's how the programme came about. The programme's been running since 2019, and SEMLEP was initially awarded £1.27 million to be spent by March. We've actually more recently been given a bit of a top up, so we've got around £2 million to award. So in terms of the priorities, the SEMLEP priorities, under the ESF elements, SEMLEP looks to support social inclusion. So social inclusion is the prerequisite for the creation of a just and cohesive society in which each individual can fully participate and realise his or her potential. Our strategy supported activity under priority axis 6, which was tackling social and economic exclusion. And basically we're here to create inclusive opportunities for all and ensure there's real change within the South East Midlands communities. The funds under this area were specifically there to respond to the strategic objectives of the SEMLEP social inclusion strategy. So you can find a copy of that strategy on our website. And that was to address the underlying causes of differences in employment levels and worklessness in some areas, particularly for those in disadvantaged groups. To address the persistent pockets of need ranging from urban areas, and particularly in our geography in Luton, but also in the more rural areas, which are and can have real economic pressures on them, particularly with COVID as well. So in our community grants criteria document, which again you can find online, we've put the figures in there from the latest IMD figures, which will tell you where we've got the most pockets of deprivation across the SEMLEP patch. So the actual grant itself is to award to community groups. So these can be voluntary social enterprise organisations, but they have to be not-for-profit, and you have to clearly demonstrate your eligibility, and we'll get onto that in a bit more detail later. And the grants are between £10,000 and £20,000 in total. No match funding is required. The slight difference that we have compared to the rest of SEMLEP at the moment is the geography, and it's worth noting that as this contract was let back in 2013, and SEMLEP was subject to a slightly different geography then, which means that Aylesbury Vale and Cherwell are still eligible to be part of the funded programme, whereas East Northants and Wellingborough, which obviously don't exist anyway anymore, aren't. So that's even further complicated the geography, because now in Northamptonshire we have two new unitary authorities, which you may or may not know, but one is North Northamptonshire and one is West Northamptonshire. But again, the old geography still applies. So if you can still work on the old geography when submitting your application. So the projects themselves will be running between 6 and 12 months in duration. So be very honest with yourselves as to how long it's going to take to deliver your programme, particularly given the COVID restraints. And we know from experience with projects over the last couple of months, recruitment is particularly difficult, and getting people onto the programme, because some of the traditional routes of recruitment, so going door to door with the job centres and the community centres, is not currently open to you. So do please bear that in mind when you're putting your timescales together. The other thing to note is that we're very much supporting the community grants programme in line with our economic recovery strategy. So again, there's a copy of our economic recovery strategy online, and in that it talks about the most areas in need as a result of the COVID outbreak. So again, there's a couple of things highlighted there, which I'll talk about in a moment. Just to say, if you have any questions as we go along, please do pop them in the chat, and we'll hopefully pick those up as we go along. So I can see there's been a couple of in there that have already been answered, which is good. So moving on to the next slide. Okay, so the types of projects that we're looking for, as the slide says, we are looking to engage with the hardest to reach communities, and I'll come on to some of those priorities on the next slide in a bit more depth. But the projects themselves are really there to develop confidence, self-esteem and employability skills for the participants. So really trying to move them closer to the workforce or closer to education. There are some examples of activities there. So we've talked there about providing training, advice or counselling to support with a job search, assist with financial numeracy and literacy, and develop digital skills, which obviously at the moment has become even more important than it has had in the past, particularly given that a lot of this is being delivered online. But the other thing we just wanted to reiterate is that it needs to be able to be delivered within the current environment. Now, a lot of you will have experienced this over the last 12 months. We had a lot of people delivering back in March last year in a very face-to-face way, and some of them struggled to pivot to delivering online, or at least delivering in a socially distanced and safe way. So it's very important that your project takes all of these factors into account. Our grant panel very much be looking at the project to see if it can be delivered should we go into another lockdown, for example. So we'll give you a couple of examples in a minute of projects that have done that very successfully during COVID. The other thing we're keen to avoid is duplication. So please do check to see if there are any other projects that are being delivered locally that do the same thing that you want to do. And if in doubt, let us know. We've got quite a lot of contacts, so we can look at that for you. Okay, so we've got a question. As recruitment is harder, will there be more leniency in regards to funding per participant, i.e. can we get fewer numbers than you would have required pre-COVID? So there hasn't been any relaxation in the per learner amount of money. There have been some relaxation in other rules, which we'll talk about later. But if you don't feel you can get the numbers that you previously wanted, then you can look at a smaller project, perhaps. We've had projects as low as 10, 15 participants, but obviously we wouldn't be paying you the full amount of money. So it is still around about £1,000 per learner, or thereabouts. Some people are doing more, some people are doing less, but around about £1,000 per learner. Okay, so talking about target groups, this slide gives you an overview of all the various target groups that we are looking to engage with. But in supporting the economic recovery plan, those that are highlighted in yellow are the ones that will be given priority by our grant panel. So we've identified that people with disabilities, health conditions and neurodivergent traits have been particularly badly affected during COVID, as have people aged over 50. So particularly in areas like Luton, the redundancy rates of people over 50 are very high. So we are focusing on those, but we are still looking at all of those other target groups as well. Again, you will find this in the grants guidance on our website, and we will be circulating these slides. But I just wanted to highlight those two particular areas, as we will be prioritising those areas above others. And therefore, if you have got a project that looks at those areas, then that will probably get priority. So I wanted to touch on the policies that we'll be expecting you to submit should you be successful in getting your grants. The reason I'm going through that this time is that we've actually been asked for additional policies than we have in previous rounds. But they're fairly self-explanatory. The safeguarding policy, particularly given some of the target groups that we've been talking about. You need to also have a data protection policy in place, and data protection is very key because we'll be sharing a lot of data should you be successful as well, but we'll talk about that in a bit more detail. With equalities and diversities, we need not only a policy, but we also need an implementation plan. So we need to have both of those documents submitted as part of the equalities and diversities, as well as sustainability as well. So we have got a template, or we can share with you after this, the ones that we've done for SEMLEP, if you haven't got one in place already, just to give you a bit of an idea of exactly what it is we'll be asking for. We'll also need a copy of your health and safety policy, and a new one that we've also been asked to ask you for is an anti-harassment or anti-bullying policy. Sometimes that can be intertwined in other policies, but as long as you highlight that to us, we are particularly looking for all of those policies. You don't have to submit that at application time, but you will be asked for that should you be successful. So it's better to have them all ready to go. So just wanted to talk through a couple of case studies, and we've picked these ones because they particularly did well during COVID. So this first one, which is BUDS, or Buckinghamshire Disability Service, they were actually delivering during the first lockdown, had started delivering face-to-face, but actually managed to pivot very successfully mid-project, and successfully got everybody online and doing all the delivery online, as you can see there, somebody in their garden on Zoom. But what was really good about this is actually the experience of getting everybody online helped with the programme, because it was actually quite a digitally based programme in the first place. And then there's a great quote there to say that in the last 4 months, I've achieved more personally than I thought was possible. I have a newfound confidence and skills. So that's really what we are looking for to achieve from these projects, and a really nice quote there. A second case study, again, these guys were delivering during the first lockdown. They were working with the unemployed over 50s. And again, as you can see from that picture, they started off delivering online, face-to-face, but then they pivoted in about April, May time to delivering that online. And I think it was particularly interesting because a lot of the participants were a little bit older, and as we all know, they're not always the most technologically advanced, but again, gave them some great new skills using the digital environment to help them overcome some of those technical fears. So really good project again. So each project that we award funding to has a number of project deliverables. So we've already talked about learners, and they are classed under ESFA as an STO1. And as I said, depending on the level of investment you're looking for, if you're going for the full amount, 20,000, then we'd be looking around 20 learners. We'd also then be looking for at least 17% of those progressing into paid employment and 14% progressing into education. And we'll talk a lot more about what that actually means and how you evidence all of that. But it is worth noting that volunteering is not an output under community grants projects, so you can't count them in the PGO ones, for example. However, volunteering as part of your project is fine, so you can incorporate that into your project, but it just can't be classed as an output. So I'm going to have a little pause there just to check that if there are any questions at all. Please do just pop those in the chat. Okay, I'll take it that I've explained all that perfectly, and I will therefore hand over to Becky.
Thank you, Gail. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about eligibility. Some of this Gail has already touched on, but just to be clear, most of this is fairly self-explanatory, the next couple of slides, but they are non-negotiable, so you do need to have a good look at them and make sure that you fit the bill in all of these aspects before you spend too much time going ahead and thinking about shaping a project or filling in an application. So you need to support people in the SEMLEP region, and as Gail has already explained, it's a slightly different region to what it might be currently. So you need to check the guidance, check where you're delivering. Your organisation needs to have less than £300,000 as your annual income in your most recent year, and fewer than 50 full-time equivalent paid employees. And in addition to that, you do need to be able to show that you have complete autonomy from any organisation that has in excess of either of those. So if you have an umbrella organisation, or if you're part of a national organisation, you need to be able to clearly demonstrate that you are a separate organisation, that your finances are completely separate from those larger organisations. Okay, can I have the next slide? Thank you. You need to have a constitution of rules saying how your organisation is managed and what it does. That doesn't need to necessarily be called a constitution. You might call it your memoirs, it might be your rules, it could be called various numbers of things. Basically, it's your governing document. And that needs to be able to show clearly that you have a legal structure that shows you are a VCSE organisation. Again, it's quite broad what that means. You don't have to be a registered charity. You could be a CIC, you could be a corporation of some kind. But your legal constitution needs to show that you are a non-profit making organisation. We do have a list of what that means in the guidance, and it broadly reflects other funders, including the National Lottery. So if you've applied for any funds through those, then you'll probably be aware of the rules and requirements around that. So basically, we can't accept applications from sole traders or private companies or companies limited by shares. If you have any doubt or uncertainty around whether or not your organisation fits the bill, then please get in touch and let us know at a really early stage, and we can hopefully clear that up for you again before you spend too much time on any more work relating to your application if you don't quite fit. So you need to have a UK bank account in your organisation's name, and you need to have all the insurances listed there at a minimum level of £1 million for each of those. Okay, thank you. It's back to Gail, I think, for this one.
Yes, thank you, Becky. So in terms of actually how you go about making your application, the first thing is check your availability, your eligibility against the grants guidance. Submit via our website, and the website link is at the top there. Submit your expression of interest. There's a small form to fill in on the website. If you're going for any extension or additional applications, the same process applies. You then have the opportunity to talk to Becky. So once you submit your expression of interest, you'll get an email with all her contact details on it. So you'll have that opportunity. She'll talk a little bit more about how that will work in terms of submitting applications for her to read through. And once you've established that everything seems okay, if the project is eligible to proceed, then you can proceed to the full application. And apologies, that should say, I think it's 12 p.m. on the, and I'm going to ask Ali to come in here and tell you exactly the date that it's going to close. Sorry, Ali, to pick on you now.
That's all right. It closes on the 30th of September, 12 o'clock midday.
So 30th of September, 30th of...
not September,
June. I was to say, that's a really long process. So it's 30th of June.
Sorry.
12 o'clock.
Can I also just say there, although we mention it in the guidance, at 12 o'clock, the system actually cuts off. And if you haven't submitted your application by that time, it will disappear.
Yes, good advice. So we've had a few issues with that previously, so don't leave it to the last minute to do it. Try and do it a few hours before the deadline, because as Ali says, it does cause a sort of IT meltdown. So best to get it in there as quickly as you can. So any questions on the application process? Okay, great. So I'll hand over or back to, oh, no, there we go. Back to Becky.
Okay, so just a few notes on your application. You will need to answer a number of due diligence questions. So those are mostly yeses or nos. So you need to just work through those and answer them to the best of your ability. Describe your project and its fit with SEMLEP priorities. Gail has talked a little bit about that earlier on, but all the details on the SEMLEP priorities are in the guidance and on the SEMLEP website. And as Gail mentioned, that is an area which a lot of people tend to perhaps not answer as fully as they could. So please do bear that one in mind as you go along. You need to demonstrate how your work will help participants to progress. That sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised actually the amount of people that don't always lay that out, because I think it's very often very clear in your mind why the work that you're doing with people helps move them towards employment or education, but you do need to sort of spell that out to us. Don't make any assumptions about prior knowledge about your organisation and what you do on behalf of the panel, because it might not be there. And please remember that questions are scored separately as well. So you do need to put the relevant information in each one relating directly to the question that it's asking. You'll need to explain your participant journey, including how they'll be recruited, what soft outcomes they'll gain along the way, right on to then progression. And you will need to give details of staff delivering the project. And of course, you'll need to go into some detail about projected costs for your budget as well. So just some reminders. Don't forget to think carefully about the work you're planning and its relation to the priorities and outcomes. Don't try and shoehorn something that just doesn't fit, because it will be obvious that that's what you're trying to do. So please only go to the trouble of putting in an application if you genuinely feel that it's the right programme for you. You will be sent a link to the online application portal, and you will need to use that. You can go in and you can then go out of it as many times as you want before the deadline, so you don't have to answer it all at once. But you will be given login details after you've gone in and done some work on it. Then you'll be sent the login details in order for you to return it. We will give you with your when you've put in your expression of interest, and you'll get an initial email, and that does have a Word version of the application form attached to it, but that is purely for you to develop a draft and work out what the answers to the questions are going to be before you hit the online portal. You cannot submit your application on that Word document. So, but it's more useful because obviously I can't see your workings on the portal. So if you do want to feed anything back to me, the Word document is a really good way of doing that. And then hopefully by the time you come to the online portal, you'll be able to pretty much copy and paste your answers from the Word document into there, which just makes it a little bit simpler. You need to look at the eligible costs. There are things that are eligible and there are things that are not. So you need to look at those and plan your budget realistically. Again, if you have any questions about that, or you have something that you want to put in there, but you're not 100% certain whether or not it's eligible and it's not explained in the guidance, then you can come to us and ask the question. Make sure you're answering the question being asked and look out for any word limits. Again, sounds obvious, but you might think you've put some information in an earlier question, but actually if it's relevant to the one being asked, put it in there. And there are word limits on a lot of the questions, so please be really conscious of those, because otherwise you just won't be able to enter your response on the portal, or not all of it anyway. The word limits are made clear, I think, right in saying this, on the Word application form, so you will have that knowledge before you go into the online application, and it's something that I will try and check for you if you send me a draft, but don't always rely on me as well, you know, do that double checking. And you'll also need to check that you've attached all the required documents on the online portal before you press submit. If you don't attach everything that you need to attach, then you will not get through that first stage. There are checklists all over the place, so you've got no excuse. In terms of what we can do to help, we can discuss potential project ideas and make sure that you're eligible. That's both eligible as an organisation and that the project's eligible. I would rather do that, as I say, at a really, really early stage before you put too much time and effort into your application. So if you have, you know, if you can just send me an email, let me know what you're planning to do, that kind of thing would be really, really good. And then we can hopefully establish that it's all fine before you get too far along the line. The guidance is quite detailed and does have quite a lot of information in there, so I would always say please have a look through that first, because it will answer a lot of your questions. But any questions that you have throughout the application process which are not covered in the guidance, and there's likely to be some, because obviously we can't anticipate every individual circumstance that people are going to have, then I can answer those questions as you go along. I can also help you determine which supporting documents you're going to need, and I can give feedback on drafts of your application. However, again, please don't leave that until the last minute. If everyone comes in the day before the deadline expecting me to give them feedback on full drafts of their application, it's just not going to happen, I'm afraid. Certainly not in time for you to then make any changes. So I think on the email that you'll get when you've put in your expression of interest, I've said that drafts need to be with me by close of play on the 24th, which is the week before the deadline. That gives me a few days to work through them all and get them back in time for you to make any amendments you need to make. Obviously, if there are any last minute questions or panicked, worries that come up in the last few days, then I will certainly do my best to answer those, and I will be on hand right up until the deadline, but not for any lengthy comments and feedback. Okay. Just to whiz through a few sort of common mistakes that people make in funding applications generally. Just watch out for some of these. So a lot of it's around missing information. So that could be anything from documents through to missing answering questions or insufficient information given. You're quite fortunate in this grants programme in that you are actually given details of the weighting applied to each question. So the scores that sort of are available for each question. So if you see something that one question is worth 30%, for example, of your final score, then don't write 3 lines for it, because clearly that's not going to enable you to get the best that you could for that question. Make sure that you show that there's a need for what you're doing. Make sure that you show that you can manage the project as an organisation. Make sure that you can show you've got procedures that you need in place and that you've planned it through. And lastly on there, just to make sure that you are financially viable and you do have the financial processes in place that you're going to need in order to manage the project if you are lucky enough to be awarded it. Okay. Just a few more on that. So again, this top one is just around making sure that you don't give any assumptions. You've probably lived with the idea of your work and your project and your organisation for however long, but the panel won't have. So don't assume that we know what you're doing. Be very clear about what you're doing and why you need the money and what it's going to pay for. Excuse me. And being clear about how you're going to staff it and how you're going to monitor and evaluate the work that you do. And finally, as I said earlier, just making sure your project is really clear on how the progressions will be achieved. As I say, don't take it for granted that your work will get people closer. You need to really lay out the steps that will allow them to do that. Okay. Oh gosh, and all of these as well. So you'll see these on the slides, but it is just around making sure you read what's being asked of you, you look at the priorities. First of all, really just make sure that it is the right thing for you. And if you're not sure, as I say, please do ask. Ask me if it's something to do with the application. If it's something to do with SEMLEP specific, then you can approach the community grants team there. and we will, if we don't know the answer, we will find it out for you. Make sure you've planned and budgeted accurately. Make sure you've answered all the questions and submitted everything you need. Allow enough time so you're not rushing on the morning of the 30th trying to get it done. You know, give yourself that time just for the uploading, not for the actual writing. And getting somebody else to read your application before you submit it. And you're fortunate again here in that we're offering that as part of the programme. So it's not mandatory, you don't have to, but you know, it's there as a resource for you. So you may as well take advantage of it.
Great, thank you very much, Becky. So in terms of what happens once you've submitted your application, we will then ask Becky to have a look at each of your applications, and she will be assessing for things like eligibility, making sure that you've uploaded all the right documentation, and just making sure that the project that you have submitted overall is an eligible project. So that is stage 1. And there is a pass or fail element to that. So if, as Becky said earlier, you haven't uploaded all the right documentation, or we actually decide that your constitution doesn't make you eligible, then unfortunately that would be a fail at that stage. But if you're lucky enough to pass at that stage, it then goes on to the stage 2. And we have an officer scoring panel, and they are made up of SEMLEP employees who have ESF experience, and they are then graded. This is the second section of the application. So Becky very much focusing on questions 1 to 6, and then the officer scoring panel then focusing on the remainder of the questions, which really talks about the project and what you're going to deliver, how you're going to deliver it, and all of the rest of it. And again, if you do not make a certain threshold at this stage, and the threshold to pass is the magic number 6. So if you score 6 or higher, then you would progress through to stage 3. We do actually at the moment keep those that haven't reached that threshold in reserve. So if for any reason there are not enough applications going through, or the grant panel feels that there is actually some merit in the proposition that you've put forward, although it falls below a 6, we may well still pass it, but we will let you know at that stage whether you've passed or failed and whether you've progressed to stage 3. So stage 3 is the grant panel. The grant panel is made up of external people to SEMLEP. We have Mary Clark chairing the grant panel, and she is a very long-standing board member for SEMLEP, but also been the chair of the ESIF committee for many years, so fully understands the processes. And then we've got various people from local authorities around the SEMLEP patch and private businesses and the VCSE sector. So a real cross-section of people who all will be assessing your application in that final stage, and they will then be making a recommendation. And it'll be one of 3 recommendations. It will either be rejected at that stage, it can be approved with conditions. So we might need to come back to you and say, okay, the grant panel has approved your application. However, we still need you to do X, Y, and Z before we can award you the money. So that will come out following the grant panel. And then the final option is that it's been approved. Now, this is all going to happen over the next month, 6 weeks. So it will be around the 1st of September that we're looking for projects to actually start. So do bear that in mind when you're writing, particularly in your milestones section, and also the section that talks about when you're actually going to have your cohort starting, etc. You need to allow yourself enough time from that award of contracts, so let's say the 1st of September, to do your recruitment and then to start your cohorts. So do bear those sort of timescales in mind when you're thinking about your milestones particularly. So once you have been awarded the project, then we will book in a project inception meeting with you. So that will be with myself, Ali or Heidi, and we will go through with you in some detail the paperwork that needs to be produced. So we're going to talk about that in more detail now, but we will go through it again with you. Appreciating that there's a bit of a long time scale between now and when you start the project. We'll also be looking for you to produce a monthly report to us. So that's just for us to check on progress and also to flag any issues that may arise. And obviously then we'd start to talk to you and help you with trying to manage those issues. We'll also be running quarterly forums for all providers. This is a great time for all of the projects to come together, share best practice, and we also generally have a theme. So for example, the last theme was about recruitment in a pandemic because a lot of the projects were struggling with that. So we really listen to what the issues are that are sort of coming up from the projects, and then try and share some of the projects that perhaps are doing that well, give you the opportunity to ask questions and hopefully get some ideas. And then you'll be submitting your claims in 4 tranches. The first one you will get as soon as you've got your contract signed. We ask you to send in your first invoice, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So again, just going to pause here for a moment to see if anybody's got any specific questions about anything we've just talked about. Okay, excellent. So I'm going to hand over now to Ali, who is going to talk you through some of the eligibility and paperwork.
Thank you. So for the participant eligibility, to be eligible for support from ESF, an individual must be legally resident in the UK and able to take paid employment. They have to be 16 plus as well. It is expected that ESF support for unemployed people will be used to move individuals into work or closer to employment by providing vocational training, information, advice and guidance. So with that, you need to obtain evidence that they are legally able to reside and work, and that can either be by a passport, visa, birth certificate, etc. You need to provide evidence that they are unemployed or economically inactive, and people who are in full-time education are actually ineligible for community grants. And then also you need to evidence that they actually meet your project criteria. So if you're doing over 50 projects, then obviously the participants need to be over 50s. So just to go through some of the forms with you, I would ensure that you do allocate enough time in your project for the paperwork. They are quite lengthy and, you know, we do require a lot of evidence for them. So the first form will be an enrolment form. And on the first engagement that the participant has with you, this will be completed. It's their personal details and everything, and that's where you will gather their evidence. You may have a referral form. So if they're being referred from another agency, let's say Job Centre Plus, and they've done all of their eligibility checks, then Job Centre Plus can complete this form for you, but they must document what they've seen, and you must be satisfied that they meet the eligibility criteria, because at the end of the day, if we find that they're not eligible, we won't be able to count them in your numbers. And then they'll complete individual learning plans. So this is a live document that will be updated throughout the project. But on here, this is where you record their needs, to set up goals, to record the learning aims, and then document any review meetings that you have with them throughout the lifetime of the project. Every engagement that the participant has with you needs to be documented on a timesheet, because the first 3 forms, so the enrolment form, the individual learning plan and the timesheet, is what is used to evidence your STO1. When the participant finishes their project, then they will complete an exit form, and that's really just to show how you've supported them throughout the project. And then the progression form, this will be completed if they move into employment, education or training. With that, it can either be a college course, part-time, full-time, or it can be training with another training provider. But you've just got to be careful, obviously, that it's not another ESF and that it will be double funding. So that needs to be taken into account. If you're doing face-to-face training, all forms require a wet ink signature. Since COVID, there has been some relaxation around wet ink signature, but we do need other audit trails. So if you've had a Zoom meeting with a participant and you've captured all of the information, and then you email it to that participant to confirm that the details are correct, they would email back to say, yes, I confirm it's correct, and that would be your audit trail. So we do need audit trails just to prove everything's okay. With regards for evidence of progression, a participant must go into either education, training or employment within 28 days of them leaving your course. So when your last learning aim finishes, that's when the 28-day period starts. And it has to be that they've started. We cannot accept offer letters because it could be that they didn't go into it in the end. So I would bear that in mind when you're doing your applications. So for employment evidence, what we can accept is a letter on letter-headed paper or with a company stamp from the employer confirming the participant's full-time, part-time employment, start date, the hours contracted. We can accept an email from the employer which shows the employer name, title, company details, again the start date and the hours contracted. With that, I would make sure that you do have a proper company email address and not just, let's say, alisoncoleman@gmail.com. It needs to show an employer email address. We'll also accept a contract of employment. But to go into self-employment, what we'd accept is a copy of the letter from HMRC, evidencing registration, a bank statement for a business account, or registration with Companies House. Again, I would just like to stress here that it's got to show that they've started employment and not just an offer letter or an offer email, or, you know, just an email from the participant saying I'm going to start a job in September when they finished with you August or something, July. Next slide, please. So with education, again, like I said, it can be either into a college or it can be with a training provider. So you'd have a copy of the enrolment or registration form, where applicable, a copy of the college ILR or a signed letter of confirmation of enrolment from the provider. Now, the above evidence must show the participant's name, the course title, the level of course, and the guided learning hours. If the course is at the same level as what you've just been doing with them, then it needs to be 20 hours or more. But if you've been doing a level 1 and they progress onto a level 2, then it doesn't need to be that 20 hours, but it still needs to show how many hours that course is for. Again, they must have started. So with publicity, obviously everything you do must have the ESF logo. Any paperwork that you produce for it, please put on the ESF logo. This is something that we will look at. I would say, you know, put the logo on your website when you put your project details on there. I will look at that, and I'm sure that ESFA will do it as well. So please just put the logo on everything. If you're doing face-to-face delivery, then an ESF A3 poster must be displayed at your delivery location, and this will be in a public area, so members of the public can see that you're offering this training supported by ESF. If you're doing online training, then you can either put the poster behind you, or you can have it as a background on Zoom, and then if you take a screenshot and send that through, then that's what we can use as evidence to the ESFA. And please ensure that all participants know about ESF support. On the SCG 20, there is a question that asks them if they know how it's being funded. If it's not ticked, the form will be returned to you, because that is something that the ESFA are quite hot on at the moment.
Thanks, Sally. We've got a question at this
sorry.
stage. Are outcomes for education or employment counted if it's before the end of the funded programme, or is it only in the 28-day window?
So if they go on, sorry, do you mean with that? So a participant can leave early, go into their employment or education, or they can go into education employment and still be on your programme. Because obviously some of the support that you provide, you know, it gets them into the work, but they also need that backup support to keep them in work or education. Has that answered it? Yes, thank you. So this is just an example of what the poster would look like. Obviously have your project name, your insert the aim of the project with a brief description of what you're doing. And obviously there it shows it is part funded by the European Social Fund, and there is the European Social Fund logo. We will also give you SEMLEP logo and ESFA logo, which we would ask is also on the poster if you can put it on. So finally, a copy of all the promotional materials, along with certified copies of all the participant paperwork, must be returned by post and electronically with your second claim onwards. Obviously, we'd ask for it by post if you've got the wet ink signatures. If it's all done online and there's the audit trail, then you'll have submitted that to us. So the post doesn't work there.
Great, thank you very much, Ali. So again, just a little pause for any specific questions relating to that section of the presentation. Okay, all right, so I'm going to hand over now to Heidi, who's going to talk you through the claims process.
Hi, right. The claims, a lot of people seem to think they're very, very complicated, but actually they're not. If you just follow the process, your first claim, as Gail stated earlier, will consist of your invoice with the following description, that it's an invoice to 25% of the services that will be delivered to SEMLEP. This is 25% of your grant total, which is paid to you in advance, and it's to allow you to set up for your project, get people in place, overheads, paper, anything that you might need. Your second claim, you have to evidence the spend from this first 25% along with your spend in your second claim. So that then goes into arrears. And that's how the claim works all the way through. Your first one is in advance, and the next 2, 3, 4, however the tranches work for you, will be in arrears and have to be evidenced with the paperwork. Good, thank you. It's on a big spreadsheet, which we call the SCG 11 A, B, C and D. And on this, there's the front cover of the claim form, which is just a quick overview of what you're spending and the totals. The B form is where you write everything down that you've spent. C is for any mileage and reimbursements from participants. And the 11D is the deliverables description, which we do need filling in. When you send in this claim, you need to send in any of the invoices, receipts, bank statements showing defrail, anything that you're claiming for. Bank statements, obviously, you know, can be redacted, any personal information, just ink it out, but we just need to see like your staff have been paid or the tutors are being paid and the invoice is there. This slide shows the front cover, which is the SCG 11A. And as you can see, we need your company name, that it's community grants, your email address, the project reference number, which you will get with your contract, and then your bank details. And then basically just lower down, you can use the same wording here. You could be, I don't know, it says evolving workforce, CIC, whatever your name is. And it's just the costs related to the STO1s, PGO1s and PGO3s. That's basically all you need on that front cover. And it's, you can see on there, it says the 5,000 and it does the balancing. This is the second part of the sheet. We couldn't get it all on one slide, unfortunately. So, and it shows you how it works out. All the cells in the orange will change themselves. Don't touch them. Where it says the total grant awarded in the white, you can, whatever your total grant is, it could be 15,000, 1799 or something. You can put your figure in there, and then your figure for your 25% goes along, and it will automatically adjust the figures for you. So it is quite simple. Once we start playing with those yellow cells, we all get confused. Right, the 11B, this is the one where you show the evidence. So it's quite simple. Item 1, marketing. What we would like you to try and do with your, when you scan in your invoices, if you sort of mark them, item 1, line 1, so that we can match it up. When I'm looking on screen, I can say, right, that one, that's for that, and there's the amount. And it's just ensure, you know, the supplier name's there, your invoice date, any invoice number, and the amount. And work it all the way down, 1 to 3, it will add up. As it says on this one, allocate a number to the scanned receipts, link them to the entry on the SCG 11B, i.e. item 1, line 1. And all these copies, they must be certified, stamped as true copies. You can add extra rows. There's no problem with that. When you scan the original invoices and receipts to SEMLEP, as it says on here, they must follow the item number as near as possible, as per your expenditure sheet. These will be posted to SEMLEP eventually. Obviously, we don't expect them now, but at the close of the project, we will be asking for all the original receipts, as this is what the ESF wants. So please don't get rid of them. You'll have to store them somewhere, but in the interim, scan them in, and then we can get on with the payments. The bank statements showing all defrail must be submitted along with the signed timesheets, any pay slips where necessary for staff, invoices for trainers, and the hourly pay to the project. It helps if we know what the staff are being paid per hour to just the specific SEMLEP project. Invoices and receipts. And as we said before, please don't change any formulas within the spreadsheet. If you have a problem, just give us a call. We're always here. and we'll try and sort it out for you if it does go a bit wrong. But it is difficult. Even our finance manager shakes his head at me and goes, "No, Heidi, I can't do this." So please don't play with them. Just a point we need to make, that with your second claim, no monies will be released until we have your evidence, your expenditure evidence, and we also need the participant signed enrolment forms. So that all comes together with your claim too. This one is quite self-explanatory. I don't want hundreds of little receipts like this because I've got nowhere to store them here at home. If you just put 3 or 4 onto an A4 piece of paper and scan it in, that will be great, thank you. But as I said, just keep them in the big wallet and we'll collect them at the end of the project.
Great, thank you very much, Heidi. So that's it from us. But before we finish up, are there any questions that remain unanswered for anybody? Okay, so we've got one. Do the output requirements mentioned earlier mean 17% into employment and 40% into education, or one or the other? It is both. So we are looking for you to achieve both of those aims as part of this project. Right, any more questions at all? Okay, great. So we hope you found today useful. There is obviously lots more information on our website, and you can contact any of us with questions. Particularly Becky in the first instance, as she will be the person dealing with the applications initially. I'd also like to thank our presenters this afternoon, so Becky, Alison and Heidi, and we look forward to receiving your applications. Thank you very much for joining us.